AMC's The Walking Dead is an iconic dystopic horror TV show following the survivors of a world-ending outbreak of zombies. It was based on a popular comic book series, ran for 11 seasons, and had its shares of ups and downs on screen and behind the scenes. The show's legacy continues in spin-offs and an increasingly expanded universe and lore that goes way beyond the comics, but it all started here. The show had many important developments, but here's my list for the most singularly important moments in this iconic show about a world overrun by the undead. Definitive Moment 1, Season 1, Episode 1, Days Gone By. The pilot airs. The pilot for The Walking Dead aired on October 31st, 2010. It was a confident start, and AMC committed some really credible weight to it. The director of the pilot and writer of 4 of the debut season's 6 episodes was the talented director Frank Darabont. Having helmed the likes of The Mist, Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption, he was a seasoned and distinguished name with the genre of horror sci-fi drama. You had an impressive team of producers, including Aliens and Terminator alum Gale Ann Hurd. The production team fought for 4 years to get Robert Kirkman, Tony Moore and Charlie Adlard's work from the comic book page to live action. By all accounts, everyone involved in bringing the property to a screen-watching audience was a genuine fan of the comic. Production of the pilot and initial episodes went quite smoothly. AMC showed faith in the series with press junkets and a sizable advertising push, as well as holding big events in locations including London, Washington and Hong Kong. The show stayed broadly faithful to the comic, featuring scenes and even some iconic shots framed exactly as they were on the page. The pilot was met with success. It looked great, felt compelling, and it all worked on screen. Critics and audiences were impressed and keen to see more, and the viewing figures were excellent. It was the highest rated series premiere AMC had ever aired. The pilot was nominated for and/or won accolades and awards for acting performances, makeup, directing, and just being the best show on TV, in as many words. The first episode deserves recognition for getting the ball rolling on a series with top quality presentation and a loyal and enthusiastic audience. It was a confident start that really set a high bar. Special mention goes to Episode 2. Might not seem like such a big deal, but Episode 2 significantly expanded the cast and the scope of the show. It truly showed that the pilot wasn't a fluke and that the show would work as an ensemble. Defining Moment 2, Season 2, Episode 1, What Lies Ahead. Season 2 starts without an important player. After a massively successful debut season, wouldn't a second season come as no surprise to anyone? Why does this deserve a mention as a definitive moment of the show? Well, some of that has to do with the quality of what's on screen, but a lot has to do with the behind-the-scenes changes that would solidify the vision for The Walking Dead for the rest of its run. The big news here was that Frank Darabont was gone. The reasons seem to be very unclear, with conflicting statements being issued by the studio, by Darabont, and by creator and executive producer Robert Kirkman. It's pretty clear it wasn't a harmonious and amicable decision.
You don't belong here! Get out!
The most generally consistent reason cited for Darabont's firing or leaving, how he left depends on who you ask, would suggest Darabont's frustration at a reduction in budget and therefore his epic, expansive vision for the show. For example, the original opening for Season 2 was to take place in Atlanta. It would be a 2-parter following the fate of the soldier who Rick shoots in the tank at the end of Season 1. This was confirmed by the soldier's actor Sam Witwer in interviews, and it seems like a reasonable assumption that this was indeed initially the direction the show was going. Had this intended opener happened, it would set a trend whereby the main story would be the broad focus of the show, but additional episodes would delve into the greater world introduced in Season 1, building stories around differing characters in different places and situations. Sounds pretty expensive. The illustrious original showrunner and producer wouldn't alter his vision, and the studio wouldn't budge on the budget. The centre couldn't hold. That's not all. If you weren't aware of the behind-the-scenes shenanigans, the seismic shake-up likely didn't strongly register on screen here, but the second reason this moment makes the list has to be addressed. The show was critically less well received. Ratings remained strong, but the season is considered to be somewhat slow and stretched out. This seems to reasonably be a result of the behind-the-scenes restructuring and the abandonment of the more anthological approach to storytelling. We've got to mention Season 2, Episode 12, Better Angels. Shane is killed. Rick's former partner when he was a cop, Shane, had an increasingly antagonistic relationship with Rick and the rest of the gang. Any tenuous harmony they may have had was wrecked as Shane's animosity towards Rick and his decisions grew over time. Forced into a showdown, Rick regrettably kills his former friend. In a shock to the characters and audience, Shane resurrects from the gunshot and is put down by Carl. This marks the death of a significant character and an integral moment in Rick's life. We also learn a lingering secret that was learned by Rick at the end of Season 1. The infection is present in every living human. However they die, a person will resurrect. Everyone is the Walking Dead. Defining moment number 3. Season 3, Episode 3, Walk With Me. The Governor and Woodbury are introduced. Though the group had isolated run-ins with survivors before, this is the first instance of a big bad individual and rival community as we meet Philip Blake, aka the Governor, in the township of Woodbury. The Governor was a dangerous leader and dark reflection of Rick, and he led an entire population, conflict with whom could result in open warfare. Rick and co. would continue to meet other threats like this, but this debut here showed that the show could support such an ambitious storyline. The scope of The Walking Dead was expanded with new characters and a new type of threat. The confident and well-executed introduction of this new, dangerous element, helped in no small part by David Morrissey's lauded portrayal as Rick's nemesis, saw the show reach exciting new heights. The plaudits and critical acclaim rolled in. The clash with Woodbury remains a defining moment, not just as the debut of the conflict with a rival community storyline that would be repeated throughout the show, but as a definitive example of the show getting that kind of thing absolutely right. There's just a couple of moments before we get to the next defining moment. So the first one is Season 3, Episode 4, Killer Within. Laurie dies, Judith is born. Laurie Grimes, Rick's wife and mother to Carl and Judith, dies in childbirth, bringing the latter into this world. It's a complicated emergency C-section which sees Laurie die of stress, trauma and blood loss before her corpse is shot in the head by her son to prevent her body reanimating as the undead. The body is then dragged away and eaten off screen by a marauding walker. It's just when you see it all kind of laid out like that, you realize what a cheery show this is with some really feel-good moments. Okay, there's also Season 3, Episode 13, Welcome to the Tombs. Andrea dies. Andrea, who would remain a far more integral and long-standing character in the comics, is killed in this episode. It's not the first time that a significant character from the comics has died in a different way on screen, but Andrea feels like the most important individual to have a radical departure in terms of character and fate between the two mediums. Definitive Moment 4. Season 4, Episode 9, After. The group splits up and the ensemble format gives way to isolated stories. Until midway in Season 4, the show had been an ensemble affair. Characters might engage with their own side quests, but there was always a community and place to return to. This is the first time the established group was split up, disparate, and without a home. This saw our heroes on the road, surviving as they can with episodes focusing on individual groups. It felt like the more anthological approach creative forces like Frank Darabont had envisioned with the show's conception. The sequence of events happens in the comic book, but it's a big swing for a serialized TV show to do something like this. The gambit paid off. There's a freedom afforded to tell unique stories with the isolated groupings of characters, and the show really goes for it. It maintained its momentum even while juggling its focus and introducing new through lines, characters and events. Everyone ultimately united at Terminus, and the band was truly back together in Season 5 opener No Sanctuary, and that episode deserves a shout out as a gem with horror and gore, tension and some blistering action sequences. Now, there's a few notable beats before the next defining moment, and I'd be remiss not to at least note them. So, Season 5, Episode 3, 4 Walls and a Roof. The group, starting with Abraham and his assembled group at the time, begin their trek to Washington, D.C., leaving the established state and heading to what would be the show's setting from that point on. Season 5, Episode 11, The Distance. Having met Aaron, the group arrives at Alexandria. Other colonies would be discovered and established, but this remains the default home for our heroes for the rest of the series, save for a few episodes where it's occupied by the Commonwealth. Somewhere between the end of Season 5 and start of Season 6, Fear the Walking Dead premieres. Originally pitched as early as The Walking Dead's third season, an original spin-off Cobalt, later known as Fear, aired. Initially based around a family at the start of the outbreak, Fear proved popular enough to show that the franchise could succeed with original material beyond that based on the comic. The universe could be expanded, and the televisual iterations of The Walking Dead would develop into a much broader franchise. This would come full circle to have a knock-on effect on the original show. We gotta mention Dumpstergate. Season 6, Episode 3, Thank You. In a creative misstep, Glenn is pointlessly killed for a few episodes. The show's ratcheted up tension by withholding information, but never really deliberately presented something on screen in a way to dupe the audience. As it stands, Glenn's death seems inescapable but unconvincing, his return inevitable but logically impossible. Turns out he hid under a dumpster. They may as well have had Glenn climb into the dumpster and cut a hole in the bottom and eye holes in the front and then waddle around like a drunk, bulky R2-D2, bumping into walkers and stuff while the Benny Hill music plays. It would have kind of suited the whole tone of that whole storyline. Okay, one more thing worth mentioning. Season 6, Episode 12, Knots Untie. Our heroes become the bad guys. At this point, the group has discovered Hilltop and learned about the Saviors. Taking the fight to those scavengers, Rick leads an assault on an outpost and murders the occupants in their sleep. This would make them a priority target for Negan's gang, making it a strategic misstep. It's also, ethically, the worst thing that Rick has ever chosen to do. It's a big deal for our heroes and the story going forward. Okay, we got to it. Defining moment number 5. Season 7, Episode 1. The Day Will Come When You Won't Be. We get to truly meet Negan, have some major deaths, and see a huge drop in the audience. We'd been introduced to the Saviors. Negan had been mentioned by name, and we even saw the big man at the end of the previous episode. The very start of Season 7 got beyond the introductions, and we saw someone who would become a dominating presence through the rest of the show commit an act of brutality more shocking than had been dared up to this point. It ushered an abrupt backlash and a subsequent shedding of viewers. The finale of the previous season ended with an intriguing and frustrating cliffhanger. There, The Walking Dead would again use an uncharacteristic, cheesy technique, this time a first-person perspective, to disguise who would be on the receiving end of Lucille. Turns out it was Abraham and Glenn. This proved to be a huge shock for many viewers. The abrupt death of two beloved characters sent the audience reeling, along with the graphic, explicit brutality with which they were dispatched. It was even debated on some news channels, and feedback from some viewers suggested they had been literally traumatized by the callous viciousness meted out upon two of their favorite characters. The episode was widely watched, the second most viewed episode after No Sanctuary, with just over 17 million viewers tuning in. It would, however, shed 5 million of those viewers as a result of the controversies it generated. This episode saw a reversal of the show's general growth in viewers and significant backlash from some die-hard fans. The showrunners quailed and made a decision to not portray such brutality in the future. We also saw Rick and the team more devastated and back-footed than ever before. Finally, this kicked off an extended run of episodes that received lukewarm critical responses, with a 2-season-long all-out war storyline, which was generally seen as overstretched and relatively unengaging. Defining Moment 6, Season 7, Episode 8, New Best Friends. The Scavengers are introduced. Don't look at me like that. Let me explain why I consider this a definitive moment before you judge me, okay? Right. The Scavengers have had a presence in the previous episodes, and here's where we see what they are all about. Initially antagonistic, Rick sees these rubbish dump dwellers as potential allies in his fomenting plan against Negan. The Scavengers, aka the Heapsters, aka the Heapies, aka the Garbage Pail Adults, are introduced as a strangely unemotional, black-clad clan who choose to live among garbage. Initially intended to only appear in 3 episodes, the Scavenger group were a gaggle of goofy weirdos, seemingly there just to add some drama to the sluggish, all-out war story. Having had only a brief appearance in the comics, their motivations, ambitions, and intentions are initially imperceptible. They're made no clearer by the fact that they act like simpletons and talk like babies. Led by Jadis and prone to switching allegiances on a slimy soiled dime, they initially serve as a petty annoyance for Rick and the Saviors, and frankly the audience. It feels like a discussion was had in the production offices at some point as we ultimately see the Scavengers wiped out, leaving Jadis as sole survivor of the group. The bonkers behaviour of the Scavengers was explained away, probably retconned, by a distraught Jadis, stating it was some intentional BS designed to confuse outsiders and create a communal identity. Ditching all of that allowed Jadis to behave like a grown adult and mesh properly with the tone of the show. The introduction of the Scavengers and Jadis, or Anne to use her non-stupid name, gets a mention as something defining for the show and the franchise in fact, because it represents the showrunners bringing something in, seeing it didn't work, and fixing it to give us someone important. Anne would become an immensely important character in the show and the universe beyond it, being the cipher through which the helicopter love and CRM would be explored both here and in the spin-offs. She is also the reason that Rick survives and is exfiltrated from the show in his final episode. And you've got to mention the demise of Anne's zombified people. Led into an industrial shredder, it's one of the best zombie massacre scenes in the entire show. Defining Moment 7, Season 8, Episode 9, Honor. Carl dies.
Carl, you should have stayed back with the others.
Okay, this is some messy, awkward stuff. In the middle of Season 8, Rick's son is killed off. Though not the first time a major character has died in a manner that's different from the comics, the impact of this was something unprecedented. In print, Carl would remain a stalwart presence at every step, with some very well-received character moments and stories right until the very end. He featured on the final page in a touching and fitting moment with his younger sister. This was not the fate that befell his live-action counterpart, and this left people on both sides of the camera stunned with surprise. For a lot of people, Carl was the point of The Walking Dead. He'd grown up on screen. He was the reason Rick did everything he did. Carl felt like a cipher for the audience, and reaction from the viewers to his death was generally furious. Ratings dropped significantly after this moment, though it should be noted that The Walking Dead still remained strikingly popular. It gets really interesting when you consider that the actor portraying Carl, Chandler Riggs, seemed unaware of his removal from the show until a month before his final episode was shot. He'd said he was keen to remain on the show. The actor's dad was openly furious with the showrunners, accusing them of reneging on an expressed intention to keep the character around for at least several more years. Rumours about contract disputes and all sorts of issues fly around this whole situation. Some consolation can be found in Riggs' last appearance in the show, which is the very last episode, Rest in Peace. Visiting the set for the last day of filming, it seems one thing remained consistent: the affection shown by the cast for their visiting former co-star. The episode's director, Greg Nicotero, would give Riggs a cameo in the final episode, serving as a farmer in the background during a scene with Daryl and Carol. Riggs said he was overjoyed to see the crew again and have this one last moment. Okay, let's just take a little diversion here. Season 9, Episode 1, New Beginning, deserves a mention. So, from Season 9 until the end, Walking Dead producer and writer Angela Kang would take over as the showrunner. After a few seasons which had a more muted response from critics and audiences, Kang's tenure would see the show return with more enthusiastic appraisal. The notably languid storytelling and creative missteps of previous seasons would be traded for a more energetic and consistent storytelling tone from here until the end. Defining Moment 8. Season 9, Episode 5. What Comes After? Rick leaves. Rick's departure in the show is a significant change from the comic story. The decision has much more to do with pragmatic realities of working on a TV show than a desired creative decision. Fact is, if you've spent pretty much a decade as the keystone in a hugely successful and scrutinized show, working the long hours demanded of a grueling schedule, and spending most of your time away from home, you might start to consider calling it a day so that you can be with your family at some point. Rick Grimes' actor Andrew Lincoln made this decision. No one could really judge the actor for wanting to take a break. Through its ups and downs, Lincoln was pretty much exempt from criticism, remaining an enthusiastic proponent of the show and providing a "you can't imagine anyone but him in the role" grade A performance from the very start. There were still stories to tell, and though the audience and general reception of the series had been diminished, there was no way that an established show with that creative and profitable a future would be axed just yet. There's no getting away from the fact, though, that Rick was our character. We're introduced to this entire world and story through him. He's always been the leader, the most important guiding figure through this whole journey. His loss would be palpable. As it stands, Rick's final episode was strongly received. Heartfelt without being too mawkish, it works both as an end for the character in the show and a setup for a pretty obvious conclusionary story somewhere down the line. The segments where the hallucinatory, close-to-death Rick has a discussion with Shane and then Herschel are poignant, purposeful, and fan-pleasing. To have John Bernthal back following his considerable post-Walking Dead success is fantastic, and Herschel offers some meaningful closure in a very moving scene that would be actor Scott Wilson's final appearance. He died not long after the shoot, his final episode having aired and a few hours after his appearance at that year's New York Comic Con. That kind of professionalism seems worth a mention. The last individual from Rick's past is Sasha. She was a popular character and Sonequa Martin Green is a talented actor, but this seems like a bit of a weird fit. They didn't have a noticeably close relationship. Some suggested Carl may have been a better final prophet, but Rick did have his final moments with his son, and it's not like Carl would have had much to say. The producers suggested they couldn't make a schedule work for Stephen Yeun, and it does seem reasonable that Glenn would have made a very fitting third Ghost of Christmas whatever, since Rick would have had a lot to resolve with him, so maybe that had been the plan, they just couldn't make it work. In any case, this was a huge moment. No one could say The Walking Dead was the same without its clear main protagonist. And that's not the only mega change brought to us in What Comes After. Defining Moment 9, Season 9, Episode 6, Who Are You Now? That 6-year time skip. The title of this episode seems to almost be a cheeky question from the show to itself now that Rick is gone. The significant time leap that dovetailed with the very end of the previous episode is explored in this subsequent outing. There have been instances before where the show has allowed time to pass before picking up the story, but they have typically seen minor developments occur in those intervening periods. They certainly haven't encompassed such a drastic stretch as 6 whole years. This jump changes the status of the characters, the world, locations, and the stories that would be told. It creates a show featuring a starkly different setting. Fuel, ammunition, and resources in general seem sparse, leading to a harsher interpretation of the world. The kingdom is crumbling, and the harmony between communities has decayed. New characters are introduced, and the youngest Grimes, Judith, is now 10 years old and a character in her own right. Another massive development introduced in this episode are the Whisperers. They're iconic of this era, a unique and intensely dangerous threat that help add some intrigue and drama to this new timeline and to also develop the lore around the Walkers in an interesting way. There's the feel of a soft reboot to the show at this point, as it puts significant temporal and creative distance between what came before and this post-Rick era. With Angela Kang taking the reins at the start of the season, the show seems to get back on track with better critical reception. Without the protagonist we've had from the show's start present, the pecking order changes and new challenges present themselves. Before we get to the last point, it's probably worth bringing up Season 10, Episode 13, What We Become. Two things of importance happen here. So Negan kills Alpha, and that's the beginning of the end of the Walker threat. And of course, this marks a drastic, heroic turn for Negan, who would go from the most despised and powerful villain of the show to a genuinely remorseful fan favourite who would have his own spin-off. As also mentioned, Michonne leaves the series. If there was a de facto leader after Rick, it's probably Michonne. However, her character leaves in this episode. She has some freaky, deaky, trippy stuff, puts the deuces up, and pieces out. One last little diversion. So, October 10th, Walking Dead World Beyond premieres. This is a second spin-off of the show, and it aired between the 16th and 17th episode of The Walking Dead Season 10. Based in Nebraska, Beyond shows a different part of the USA during the post-apocalypse, and it focuses heavily on the immensely powerful CRM faction who airlifted Rick and with whom Jadis/Anne was involved. The final, defining moment surely has to be Season 11, Episode 24, Rest in Peace. November the 20th, 2022 saw the premiere of The Walking Dead's finale. The Commonwealth storyline wraps up here, before a one-year time skip allows the dust to settle and we get to know the ultimate fates of the characters within the show. Though several spin-offs had been announced, this is the end of the original show that had by and large followed the events of the comic book. Anything Walking Dead on screen from this point is an original endeavour. Reaction to the last episode was broadly positive. Personally, I found it to have some phenomenal performances that added to the melancholy feeling of saying goodbye to the show, as well as a sense of finality. Yeah, we know about the spin-offs, but if you let the characters have the moments they experience in this finale, it works as a fitting end for all of the characters that we've been following. There's a mostly positive vibe here at the end, which is very welcome. The characters have been through so much, they've really earned a happy ending. AMC announced a 10-year plan for the Walking Dead franchise, but this is the end of the original show, and it serves as its final defining moment. The Walking Dead was a flagship show for AMC throughout its run. It had ups and downs, but remained strikingly popular in terms of viewer numbers. The quality of the acting, general presentation and production values were always stellar, and... Alright, okay, fine. So there's a few moments that didn't quite reach the bar. That deer, by the way, it isn't CGI. It is a real deer. It was just composited into the shot at the last minute so the lighting and the atmospherics don't match properly, making it look like the Cerberus of the Uncanny Valley. I am not ending this video on that damn deer. Right, The Walking Dead continues in various guises, but the original show will always remain the seed from which the burgeoning franchise grew. It will always have been an all-round success for AMC and its creative team, and a fondly remembered and missed show for its fans.